Welcome in to the 48 Minutes podcast on Believe, presented by Bet Online. I'm Ross Geiger, the former NBA video coordinator, and I'm joined alongside Bruce Bernstein, our four-time Emmy Award winner, who spent more than 3 decades at ESPN producing NBA shows, SportsCenter, and soaking up knowledge from the best hoop analysts in the business. Also joining us is the 2-time Emmy Award winner, Michael Worldby Freer, who is a senior writer at StatFactor, specializing in writing advanced statistical NBA reports for various announcers across the league. This is episode number 145, the Rudy Tomjanovich episode, as the former Rockets player turned legendary coach wore number 45 throughout his entire 11-year playing career in Houston. Bruce, before I provide a friendly reminder to our good folks, why don't you remind them of our favorite quote from Rudy?
Never underestimate the heart of a champion.
I love it. One quick reminder now before we get started. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one betting source from every three-pointer to hat trick. BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. And tonight, let's start things off by discussing some unfortunate news coming out of San Antonio, as Victor Wembanyama will miss the remainder of the season due to a blood clot in his right shoulder. As sad as and unfortunate as this news was to the Spurs fans and basketball fans worldwide, thank goodness this clot was caught. If the clot like this was left undetected, it could be life-threatening. So starting off with some very scary stuff here, Bruce.
You know, blood clots are serious business. You know, they can cause a stroke. They can cause you to die. I mean, we'll all remember how Chris Bosh's Hall of Fame career was cut short after he was diagnosed with blood clots in his lungs and his legs. And in the past several years, Brandon Ingram and Ausar Thompson have also missed time due to blood clots. But the cause of the clot matters a lot because surgery has been successful when the clot is structurally caused, like, say, by a rib pressing against the vein. But other causes are treated with medicine. But they say Wemby's going to make a full recovery. At least he's expected to, and he'll be back for next season. But, whenever something like this happens, this injury hits home like very few have ever hit me. I go back to young guys dying like Reggie Lewis or Len Bias. And of course, hopefully that's not going to be the case with Wemby, but you just like pray to the basketball gods that he'll get the proper treatment and his body allows him to recover.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Worldby, what were your initial reactions when you saw the news?
I felt, like everybody else, I felt really disappointed and it was a really scary thing, as Bruce mentioned. This is more than just, somebody hurting their ankle or hurting their knee. This is a life-threatening situation if it's not detected and handled. So you felt really bad from a basketball standpoint. You felt really bad. You're obviously thankful that he's going to make a recovery by everything you hear. It's really sad. I mean, on the court stuff, it's really sad because he's so much fun to watch. He's putting some life into this team. They were really kind of starting to struggle here down. They were having a lot of trouble in the fourth quarter and second half. So it's not as if this loss is the reason if they don't make the postseason. It will not be that they were already struggling, heading in the downward trend, I guess, if you want to call it like that. Their defense is starting to really struggle. And, it's just disappointing. He's just so much fun to watch on the court. You look forward to seeing him play. It's one of the how many players out there, honestly, are must-see TV guys at this stage of the league? He's absolutely one of them.
Yeah, one of the, things that I would say is a real shame is the fact that he was headed towards winning Defensive Player of the Year, probably in a unanimous vote. I mean, I don't know that anybody else was getting any first-place votes. So now, with him, he'll fall well short of the 65-game minimum that you need. Same with Anthony Davis, who's, hurt, for Dallas now. He was probably right there with Wemby. But, health is a tough issue, but losing out on that award is a real shame. So, it kind of opens the door for Evan Mobley or Jaren Jackson Jr. to maybe win that award. But I mean, that thing had Wemby's name all over it before he got this illness.
It really did. And now with Jaren Jackson Jr. being thrown into the mix as a contender for that award, he is due a big payday with an extension talks. Should he win that award, I think it goes up to like $325 million for his max extension. Should he win that award, and let's not forget about Dyson Daniels. I don't think he's going to win, but boy, I hope at this point with Wemby being out, he gets a few votes given how much he is dominating the league category in steals this year. He's still averaging over 3 steals a game, which is quite incredible there. Now, sticking in San Antonio, another thing that I wanted to bring up here is this past weekend, we also learned that Spurs head coach Gregg Popovich is not expected to return this season, and that his future in the NBA remains uncertain as he continues to recover from a stroke that he suffered this past November. Interim head coach Mitch Johnson will continue to hold the role for the remainder of the season, and Coach Johnson's done a decent job. He's 21-28 overall so far, but with Gregg Popovich, do you guys foresee him ever stepping foot as a NBA head coach again? Will be?
It's kind of hard to envision him being on the sidelines ever again. He's had such a great career, and we'll see how the recovery goes, I guess, and see how he feels and if he has the energy to continue on. But I mean, me personally, I just prefer to see him enjoy basketball from the stands like the rest of us, and enjoy the fact that he's had a Hall of Fame coaching career.
Bruce, what's your thoughts on Pop?
He's 76 years old, okay? But he is as tough-minded as they come. I mean, you talk about a gritty persona, whatever. He is that. So if anybody has the cojones needed to come back from this, I'll take Coach Pop. But I'll agree with World B in that if, he's already in the Hall of Fame, he's already the all-time leader in wins, he has nothing left to prove. Live your life, enjoy your time, be with your family, and like you said, watch it from the executive suite. Yeah,
I think that the best case scenario for Coach Pop, or at least what he should consider, is becoming an advisor for the Spurs, being a special advisor for the team, obviously still being around to offer input to the coaching staff and also to the front office with draft selections, because he has a hell of an eye for talent. And I think he's the type of guy that wants to be a lifer. He wants to stay around the game forever. I think he'd miss it if he was away from the team in general. So hopefully Coach Pop gets better and, has an impact on the Spurs moving forward in some capacity. Now, speaking of tough, Bruce, you brought that up. Let's talk about a tough schedule in the state of the New York Knicks, as they had a tough weekend on the road, getting crushed by the Cavaliers in Cleveland, 142-105 on Friday, then losing again on Sunday, 118-105 in Boston against the Celtics, 2 top teams in the Eastern Conference. And to be fair to World B's Knicks, they were without Josh Hart in Cleveland. And then on that same Friday night, that was OG Anunoby's return to the court. He had not played since February 1st. So a lot of things going on with the New York Knicks. And World B, I'll start with you on this one. Any legitimate concerns about the team being contenders out east, given kind of how the weekend fared, or is it too early to panic about just 2 losses to both the Celtics and the Cavs? Because the last I checked, I think they're 0-7 against the top 2 teams in the East.
Well, it's 0-7 against the top 3 teams when you throw in Oklahoma City. So that's gotcha. There's absolutely concerns. The Knicks, the lineup was brought in, the group was brought in to contend. And unless something changes, they're going to have to face either the Celtics or the Cavaliers in the second round of the playoffs, a potential matchup. And, at this point, you can't see them getting through either one of those teams, which would mean they're not any closer to a championship than they were last year, than they were the year before. They haven't been to the conference finals, never mind a championship. They haven't been to a conference finals in 25 years. This was the team that was going to take them past that. And at this point, like you said, it's not just 0-7 versus the elite teams in the league, the top 3 teams in the league. The last 4 games, they've trailed by 27 points, at least 27 points in each game. Just not being in, that's just getting the door, getting embarrassed right out of the gate. It's really something else. And we'll go into all the numbers here really quick, but one of the reasons it's a problem and you're concerned for on the court stuff is this is a really good shooting team, the Knicks are. But they're a really bad defensive team against shooters. They don't do well. Opponents, they're near the bottom in opponent field goal percentage. And they're a terrible rebound. They're not a terrible rebounding team. That's not fair. But they're not the rebounding team they have been. So what does this mean? If you're not having a good night shooting, you're not grabbing offensive rebounds, your offense looks pedestrian. If you can't defend shooters any better, and when you do have a good night defending shooters, you can't grab rebounds at the defensive end, you give the other teams. There's just a lot of holes that need to be fixed, and maybe it's Mitchell Robinson's return, which is supposed to be this week, but until I didn't realize Mitchell Robinson was the key to everything that happened in Madison Square Garden, but apparently he is, because that's supposed to cure all their ills. But it's a concern.
Now, Bruce, with them playing the Celtics on Sunday, what were your big takeaways, just focusing here on what you saw from the Knicks?
Well, the final score was 118-105. And, that doesn't really sound like a blowout, but this was a blowout loss. I mean, Karl Anthony Towns had a totally schizophrenic performance in this game. He ended up with 24 and 18, but the numbers were so hollow. He had 5 points at halftime when New York trailed by 21. So in the third quarter, Boston started playing with its food, messing around, and New York played really well in that third quarter and outscored Boston 39-25, with Cat getting 14 and 8 in that quarter. But Thibodeau played 4 of their starters all 12 minutes in that third quarter of a game that was all but already lost, okay? So they clawed their way back in. As Worldby said, they trailed by 27. They clawed their way back in, made it into like a 2-possession game, but they fell short in the fourth. Jalen Brunson went scoreless in the fourth quarter, okay? Mikal Bridges was their only offensive threat down the stretch. And as Worldby said, offense isn't this team's problem, defense is, and so is health, okay? Watching Tibbs ride his starters like that in a game where they trailed like they did was classic Tibbs. You might come back and win, but at what cost? All those minutes that Cat and Bridges and Hart and Anunoby and Brunson are playing now are going to eventually take their toll, as this happens every year with Thibodeau teams. Mitchell Robinson should return later this week, but hopefully Tibbs doesn't ask too much too soon from him when he returns.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern with this team. Obviously, from this past weekend, things aren't really trending well in New York with health to begin with. And then you have quarters like that where guys are playing 12 minutes a night. And we'll see if they can hold up for intense 7-game series against some of the top teams out east. Will be.
Yeah, real quick. The Knicks have played 28 quarters against the Thunder, Celtics, and Cavaliers. They've outscored their opponent 5 times, 5 quarters. They've outscored their opponent in a quarter 5 times out of 28. How are you supposed to win games? How are you supposed to compete for a championship when you can't even? They've never outscored an opponent more than in 2 quarters in any of the games. Yeah. So it's not the fact that they're 0-7. That's bad enough. They're just getting the doors blown off them in all these games. Bruce is right. I mean, they had it down on Sunday to 4 points and was interested, but by the time the fourth quarter rolled around, the game was over.
Yeah. And what do we think about I'll ask you this. What do you think about your bench when like a guy like Josh Hart's out and you got to move in Precious Achiuwa or another peach off that bench? I just feel like there's not really much bench production right now. I know McBride has his spots, but outside of him, like there's no one really that scares me off the Knicks bench. I mean, if Cameron Payne wants to go out there and shoot 8 to 10 times a game, I feel like everyone's going to live with that.
It's the depth in the front court. And that's where Mitchell Robinson hopefully will help. They just don't have it right now. When you put Towns to the bench, who's not a great defender to begin with, but when you bring him to the bench and Precious Achiuwa comes in, that's your sub in the front court. It just doesn't work. So we'll see. Mitchell Robinson, it's just a matter of adding depth, and we'll see if that helps. Somebody's got to go to the bench once Robinson's in there. Even if he doesn't start, you figure he'll come off the bench. But somebody's got to come off the bench. It just adds to the depth. But yeah, right now the bench isn't great, but it's really in the front court where they're having their issues.
Guys, give a little credit where it's due. Landry Shamet had a good 1-minute stint yesterday where he made 2 baskets. So
Yeah. Then you mean the guy that's been traded about 9 times in his career?
That same guy.
That guy. Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of guy that's been traded quite a bit, he's brought some new life to a Western Conference team that we thought were all but dead. That is the Golden State Warriors and the Jimmy Butler effect going on in Golden State at the moment. Do the Warriors have new life? They are 5-1 with Butler aboard. Draymond Green has come out and said he has been the missing piece that this team desperately needed. Bruce, do you agree with him? Are you counting the Warriors back into consideration here in the West?
Well, look, they've won 5 out of 6 since he's joined the team, and that's significant. But really, what his presence does, it gives Steve Kerr a cheat code, because when Steph Curry takes a rest, Jimmy's been a reliable scorer for them. The Dubs didn't have one before. The team definitely has new life, and Butler's a difference maker at both ends. His offensive production is vastly bolstered by the fact that he gets more respect from the refs than any player in the game his size. He's averaging more than 9 free throw attempts per game since he's joined the team, making 89% of them. He's also a very, very, very good to excellent help defender. But I think we also have to give a little bit of credit for the recent play of friend of the show, Brandon Pajemski, who's been balling since Butler arrived. I mean, in that 5-1 streak, Pods is averaging almost 15 points and more than 6 rebounds, and he had a 13-rebound game over the weekend. So, Pods seems to have been lifted a little bit by Butler's presence as well.
Yeah, worthy shout out there for Brandon Pajemski. World B, are you taking them more seriously? I know that you and I were kind of the ones questioning this group, even with Jimmy Butler aboard, and so far they've proved us wrong.
Absolutely proved us wrong. Jimmy Butler is absolutely a difference maker. Bruce mentioned 5-1 since they got him, and the one loss came to Dallas, and they exacted a big heaping of revenge there on Sunday, blew the doors off them. Yep. So there's a lot, you give credit where credit's due, and they have a pretty solid starting lineup now that has really dominated opponents when they're on the court. And just like with we talk about the Knicks adding depth or whatever, you push people when you have a guy like Butler, you put somebody else on the bench or whatever that belongs on the bench who can provide assistant coming off, being in that role. When you have to take role players and put them into starting roles, that's where you eventually get into trouble. So this absolutely, between Draymond and Steph and Jimmy Butler, that's a nice big three to go with. They got to keep the momentum going, because their whole season had been for about 2 months a just unbelievable inconsistent role. This is the first 3-game winning streak they've had since early November. This is the first time they're 3 games over 500 since before Christmas. So they're on a roll. They just, if you want to compete in the West, you got to keep it going. It's really what it comes down to. But, they have the players now. They have a lineup. If they stay healthy, they're going to be a tough team to get out.
They definitely will be. I'm keeping an eye on them in the Western Conference standings, because I think they can totally surpass the Dallas Mavericks now, given the fact Anthony Davis is out for Dallas. Obviously, Luka's gone. I could see them getting at least home court for the play-in tournament, which we're going to talk about right after this. And we're back here on 48 Minutes. Let's go ahead and examine the play-in bubble team race in both conferences. This is something I wanted to bring up with you guys when we were trying to put together tonight's show. And I think it's a lot of fun to kind of look at both conferences, because we have a lot going on. Very interesting group of teams hovering around that 10th and final play-in spot. Let's start out west in the Western Conference. The Kings currently hold the 10th spot with an even record of 28-28 on the year. Good for a 1.5 game lead on the Suns and a 3.5 game lead on the San Antonio Spurs. But, we mentioned the Spurs at the top. Let's briefly discuss them again. Obviously, losing Wemby is a gigantic blow to their chances of getting into that 10th spot. They're 3-7 in their last 10 games, despite adding De'Aaron Fox at the deadline. Can they continue to make things interesting, or do we see them completely sliding down the standings the rest of the way, Bruce, and maybe getting in that Cooper Flag sweepstakes?
Their chances of catching Sac and Phoenix are really dim, with only 1 game remaining against each of them. And they have a lot of tough games left to play. They have Cleveland twice, Boston, OKC, Denver, and the Knicks. Now, if the last two games without Wemby are any indication, they're going to get pounded on the boards the rest of the way. They were out-rebounded by 23 against the Pelicans and by 21 against the Pistons. On the season, they're 23rd in rebound differential, and that was with Wemby for the first 53 games. So I don't see this happening. I mean, I don't think they're going to be bad enough to really get a serious shot at Cooper Flagg. But given their luck in the draft lottery over the years,
I was going to say
they may not crack the bottom four, but who knows? They might luck out miraculously get the number one overall pick. And if that happens, I'll be a little bit less shocked than many other people will be.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be something? De'Aaron Fox, Cooper Flagg, and Wemby for the future? I mean, that's a serious big three there. Worldby, what's your thoughts on San Antonio as we hit the final stretch of the season?
Well, first of all, if that lineup ever did come to fruition, maybe Popovich would come back next season and enjoy life with those three. But I think they have a shot, but they're just not trending in the right direction. I mean, when they came to the break, they were still in the bottom half of the league in defensive efficiency. They were just 19. They're one of the worst fourth quarter teams in the league, getting outscored by about almost 6 points, a little over 5 points per 100 possessions in the fourth quarter. And, in those clutch games where the margin is within 5 points or 5 minutes to go in the game, they're getting outscored by almost 10 points per 100 possessions. So this isn't the kind of stretch you want when the numbers you want when you're trying to compete, when you're trying to win these tight games. They've been a really bad second half team for a couple of months now. And so, Bruce is right. They weren't a great rebounding team with Wemby. This isn't going to help. I mean, the game the other night against the Pelicans is a pretty good indication of what's going on. To give up 74 points in the second half to New Orleans, you blow a 17-point lead. If you want to get to that spot, you can't lose these games like that. And until they show me differently, I don't see them being a part of this.
Yeah, last week. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I'm sorry, Russ. Last week we were singing the praises of Stephon Castle, and deservedly so. He had a great All-Star weekend, and he seems like he's in line to be Rookie of the Year. But he's had a little bit of a post-All-Star slump, really. But it is going to be fun to see him playing with De'Aaron Fox the rest of the way. See if those guys can develop some chemistry together. Because if they do, and then Wemby's back next year, that could be the big three if they're not horrible enough to get Cooper Flagg.
Yeah, Bruce, you kind of took the thoughts right out of my head here with the Spurs moving forward with the rebounding issues that they have. I mean, unless a guy like Jeremy Shohan can really step up, which is a tough ask for a guy that's a little undersized as a 4 anyway. He does a heck of a job out there for this group, but unless he can help this team rebound, I just don't see it happening for them this year. I mean, they're soul searching as deep as signing Bismack Biyombo to a second 10-day contract because they just have no bigs on that roster that can play.
That was my favorite transaction maybe of the whole season when I saw that. Former Hornet legend.
Yeah, well,
former Bobcat legend maybe.
The Hornets tried to challenge him there. They went and signed Alfred Payton to a contract as well with the injuries that are going.
That's a top 5 transaction deal too. Don't forget about that one.
Yep, exactly. Now moving forward here, a team that didn't make many transactions during the deadline was the Phoenix Suns as they continue to search for answers. Most recently, Mike Budenholzer elected to make some changes to their starting lineup, removing Tyus Jones and adding in Brad Beal. And guess what? We're back to having point guard Book leading the charge for the Suns. But this team is somehow still just 2-8 in their last 10 games. They had another very disappointing loss on Sunday night, losing to a now 18-win Toronto Raptor team in Toronto. Bruce, where are we at with the state of the Phoenix Suns? Is this season a wash at this point, or are you still holding out hope?
They are so wildly inconsistent. I mean, they began the season 9-2, but are just 18-28 since November 13th. They've had a 5-game losing streak, 2 4-game losing streaks, and 3 3-game losing streaks. They haven't won consecutive games since January 25th and 27th. So, and it's funny, they have a favorable schedule the rest of the way as far as 15 home games, only 11 on the road. And that schedule should be favorable, but includes 2 games each against Memphis, Minnesota, Boston, Houston, and Sac, plus games against Cleveland and OKC, the top 2 teams in the league. They ain't getting there. I mean, you said it last week. You said they would miss the playoffs entirely. I mean, I totally agree with you.
It's just crazy to think that this team's going to miss the playoffs, given the talent that they have, given that they were able to get Tyus Jones in the offseason. You know, the one thing I want to point out to Suns fans and NBA fans worldwide here is 2 things have been clear to me. Number one, Nurkic wasn't the problem. A lot of people place blame on Nurk. He's gone. You guys still can't win. And 2, I don't think Frank Vogel was the problem. I mean, they had a better record with Frank Vogel at this point in the season last year than they do right now with Coach Bud. And I've got a lot of respect for Coach Bud, but those 2 guys got a lot of blame for something that really hasn't turned around a bunch yet. World B, what's your thoughts on just this star-studded Suns team that can't, collect wins?
Well, here's the thing. You talk about Coach Bud. He's a defensive guru. We heard it from his days in Atlanta. I've championed him since his days in Atlanta. But they're the 3rd worst defense this month. I mean, or 4th worst, excuse me. Giving up 121 points per 100 possessions. How are you supposed to win that way anywhere in this league? To combat that, they're in the bottom half in this month in offense. So it's a really bad combination. You mentioned they brought in Nick Richards to try and cure the rebounding and the problems up front. Well, he's cured the rebounding, but they're still getting outscored by almost 6 points per 100 possessions when he's on the court. Well, what's the point of him rebounding if he's going to get beat when he's on the court? Obviously, he brought his Charlotte game with him too. He can't, you can take the guy out of the Hornets, but you don't take the Hornets out of the guy, I guess. So their defense is just a mess. That's really what it comes down to. It's what it comes down to with all these teams. If you want to be honest, the teams we're going to discuss going forward, it's all about defense, and they're all bad.
Yeah. Now, last but certainly not least, let's talk about the Kings that do hold that 10th and final playoff spot. They've got a 500 record. That's something that the other 2 teams can't say they have at this time, being the Suns or the Spurs. But they're just 4-6 in their last 10 games. So do we think they can hold on without De'Aaron Fox and point guard Monk? I mean, we got point guard Book and point guard Monk kind of duking it out here for the 10th and final playoff spot. Bruce, what's your thoughts on Sacramento? Do you think they can just somehow survive and be in the play-in?
Well, they appear to be the least flawed out of those 3 teams, okay? But none of these 3 teams have any real outstanding qualities. And they've got a lot of tough games coming up. 7 of their next 9 are going to be on the road. And among the opponents that they have to visit on, it's not one trip, but over that 9-game span is at Houston, at Dallas, at Denver, at Clippers, at Golden State, and then at Phoenix. So if they can stay at or above 500 the rest of the way, they're going to end up getting that number 10 spot. But they're the definition of generic. They're 28-28. They're 14-14 at home. They're 14-14 on the road. They got 13 home games left. They got 13 road games left. They are the absolute textbook definition of a 500 team. As for their coaching situation, after an early 7-game win streak when Doug Christie took over as head coach from friend of the show, Mike Brown, they've leveled off a little bit, but they're still 15-10 under Christie. So, they can't make threes. They're a terrible 3-point shooting team, 5th worst in the league. They give up a lot of points. But again, compared to the Spurs and the Suns, they're easily the best of those 3 teams.
World B?
Well, they're Bruce mentioned they're in the best position to come away from this with a spot in the play-in. But you know what? They played 1 game entering Monday. They played 1 game since the break, and they had the 2nd worst defensive performance of the season against the Warriors. So I know the Warriors with Butler. We talked about how they've been better, but you come out of the break, and you have the 2nd worst defensive effort of the season. That's just not a recipe for success. I talked about before how defense is really the key or the problem for all these teams. Well, they've been worse under Christie defensively than they were under Coach Brown. So they're bottom 10 under Christie, which is where we're used to seeing the Kings, if we're honest, over the years. They've had about a dozen years where they're in the bottom 10. So that's no different. But they're in the best position. They absolutely have to win against the Hornets on Monday and later on this week against the Jazz, because they have to go on the road on Saturday, beginning Saturday, where they play the Rockets, the Mavericks, the Nuggets, I mean, if you got to beat some of these teams if you're going to get to that spot. And that's a brutal little weekend road trip to deal with.
No doubt about that. And before we move on to the East here, I quickly have to ask you this because I know you're on top of it. Are we holding out any hope for the Portland Trailblazers to sneak in here? They're 6-4 in their last 10 games. They're playing better ball. I know you've been on top of it, and you've been nice enough to send me a few text messages about the Blazers playing better basketball lately.
Well, they have been, and you stay up late and you watch them. They're on. You have to. You have no choice but to watch them. And no, they've absolutely had playing much better, and they're a much more entertaining team to watch right now than any of the other ones, including the Kings. And who would have thought we'd say that, given the way the Kings have been the last couple of years? But they've absolutely been more entertaining. I implore anybody listening to this, when you see the Blazers up, while the going's good now, get a chance to watch them here because they have to play the Jazz tonight, and who knows what happens if they can't get by Utah there in Utah on Monday. So we'll see how it goes there. But they've absolutely been playing much better. I think they're a little too far away, too many teams to jump to get into that spot, but they're absolutely have the future looks bright for them. Just as they look like a team that has a plan after a while, after a long while.
You mentioned that Utah game here as of taping that's going to take place Monday night. Utah is without Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler in this one. So expect the Blazers win, and let's not sleep on the Blazers maybe scooting into the play-in spot. Next up, we've got –
Are the Jazz going to sign Howard Isley to a 10-day contract to try and
I don't think Howard Isley's walking through that door, Bruce. Next up, we've got the Eastern Conference here. Somehow the Chicago Bulls find themselves in the play-in at just 22-35 on the season. This is where things really get interesting, or shall we say ugly, in the Eastern Conference standings. But they've wisely lost each of their last 6 games, given that the Bulls recently acquired their own first-round pick in this summer's draft. But the big question is, if the Bulls keep losing, who's going to replace them in the play-in, Bruce?
Well, it's funny. We're kind of grouping the Bulls together with the Brooklyn Nets and the Philadelphia 76ers here. An interesting statistical fact. Well, I don't know. World B has better stuff than me on this, but all 3 teams are bad at home, but better on the road. I mean, they're all in kind of different, spaces mentally. One is an overachiever. That's Brooklyn. And 2 are underachievers. That's the Bulls and Philadelphia. They enter Monday's action, as you mentioned, with 6 straight losses, 7 of their last 8. They have lost 3 times to the Pistons in the last 22 days. They haven't won 2 straight games in almost 7 weeks. And they're second worst in the NBA in points allowed. They're just 1-6 since the Zach LaVine trade. So to call this franchise a dumpster fire is almost a compliment at this point.
Definitely an understatement for sure. World B, what's your thoughts on the Bulls?
Well, let's get this out of the way. First off, as of we're taping here, on Monday, they totally blew out the 76ers in Philly, put 142 on the Sixers. So we'll get to, when we discuss Philly, we'll have to make sure we mention that along the way. They were competitive. To their credit, they were competitive against the Knicks recently and against the Suns. They blew it against the Suns, and they had the Knicks, they really push the Knicks to the limit there. Both teams, obviously, we mentioned, are struggling, but still, give the Bulls credit for coming out and playing with some fight there. The problem is, in the month of February, entering Monday, they were the 3rd worst defensive team, the 3rd worst offensive team. Well, there's really not much left for them to do. If you can't be better than that, how are you supposed to get into any sort of winning formula there? So we'll see how it goes the rest of the season. As Bruce mentioned, they played 10. Beginning Monday was the first game in a 15-game stretch where they're playing 10 games on the road. So maybe getting out of Chicago is good for this team. They started off the right way on Monday. We'll see how it goes the rest of. I give the Bulls credit for one thing here. This offseason, or going into this season, they completely changed their style of play. On the Billy Donovan to start the season. They totally up tempo, took a lot more threes. It hasn't translated into anything, obviously, but give them credit for at least we're going to try something. The old way hadn't worked. We're going to try something. They increased the number of possessions. They're one of the leaders in possession per 48 minutes, otherwise known as pace or whatever. So they at least gave it an effort here. It just hasn't translated to wins.
Well, World B, you're right on point here. If you want to give credit for a team that's trying, let's give it to the Brooklyn Nets this season. That's the team we need to talk about here next. I mean, this was a team we all thought might be the top flag bearers heading into the season in our preseason predictions, but they now find themselves 7-3 in their last 10 games, just a half game out of a play-in spot from Chicago. Players on that Brooklyn roster continue to point out post-game interviews that they are going to compete. They are there to perform, play at a high level, and they're going to have some pride in this whole thing. So they're not out there tanking. Obviously, they've got a new hungry head coach in Jody Fernandez, who's also the head coach of the Canadian national team that likes to coach with a lot of fire. So, Bruce, I'll start with you. Are the Nets going to be a play-in team all of a sudden and kind of shock us all here?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, these are scrappy overachievers. They're trending upwards. They play at a slow pace, which is a good pace to play at if you're talking about postseason activity, because the pace of games does tend to slow down. There are fewer possessions, but they still allow 47, almost 48% field goal shooting, by their opponents, which is like sixth worst in the league. They bottomed out at 14-33 about 4 weeks ago, but since then they're 7-2 with 2 wins over Houston and 2 wins over Philly. So Brooklyn, when you play those guys, you're most of the times they lose, but they compete very, very hard, and it's a team that you can sort of enjoy the fact that they're overachieving, because I had them with like 18 wins this season in our preseason show. So, they've already passed that. So, good for them.
Will be anything to add on Brooklyn?
Oh, sure. I mean, we talked about how the Bulls were a train wreck, and they put a big old 140 plus number on Philly on Monday. Then we talk about how the Nets are playing so well, and Bruce is right, they are. And it looks like on Monday they're going to lose to the Wizards. So figure that out.
Come on, Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Well, they did a job defensively on Monday. They just didn't have it offensively. And defense is where this team has rebounded, has picked it up. The most efficient defense in the month of February doesn't belong to Oklahoma City. It doesn't belong to the Clippers. It doesn't belong to the Timberwolves. It belongs to the Brooklyn Nets. Yeah. So go figure that out. And if you really want to see a team that's competing, you go right there to Brooklyn. They played last Thursday against Cleveland, coming out of the break against the Cavaliers, the number one offense in the league, and they held them under 110 points per 100 possessions. One of the best defense, one of the few times this season Cleveland's looked ordinary offensively. That was Brooklyn's defense. So you give them credit for that. They're just, for the season, they're just behind the Nets defensively, or the Knicks, defensively. And after Monday, they probably jumped the Knicks in terms of efficiency on defense. So it's just, their offense is a train wreck, but give them credit. And, as a Knicks fan, it would really make me happy to see them get into the play-in, just because it goes against everything that they were trying to do this season, how they figured. But, here's another thing really important. We talk about how these teams are tanking and how some of these teams were looking to get to the number one pick or get into the lottery spot. You put the guys on the court, they're going to compete. It's the front office and people. The coaches don't tank. It's their jobs on the line. The players don't go in and not make a good effort or a top effort. Usually you just have players who weren't good enough. But you make the effort, and the Nets obviously are making an effort. So all this talk about tanking and everything, I get it. But don't put it on the players when you talk about that, because those are the guys out there. They're actually putting out an effort. Nobody's just half-assing it when they're on the court. They may not be talented enough to be NBA players, realistically, but they're going to put the maximum effort, I believe. And obviously the Nets are putting a lineup out there that's executing on defense at least.
Well, let's pause on players putting out the maximum effort, because next up we're going to talk about the most disappointing team in the NBA this season, and that is the Philadelphia 76ers, who also star Paul George, their big signing this offseason. They now find themselves 1.5 games back of the Bulls. Both Joel Embiid's season saga continues to be a downward spiral, if you ask me. Paul George's arrival, I mean, I kind of just summed it up there. Not much has really taken place. He has been in the dumpster all season with his performances and doesn't seem to be getting any better for Philadelphia. And if you think the Bulls' losing streak is bad, losing 6 straight, don't worry. Philly's got them beat at the moment, having lost 7 straight games, Bruce. So what do we think to Philly? Are they all but done this season, or do they still have a fighting chance to at least make the play-in this season?
Let's put it this way. Since January 31st, the Sixers have the same number of wins as the Philadelphia Eagles. 1.
Oh, man. Will be anything to add there on Philadelphia? I mean, it kind of speaks for itself there this year, I feel like.
Well, 0-5 in the month of February when they had all 3 on the court, Maxey and George and Embiid. I mean, you have your big 3 and you can't win a game. You're really running out of things for them to do. I mean, it's really what it comes down to. Their defense is just atrocious. They're giving up over 120 points for 100 possessions with those 3 on there. Even before the month of February, if you go the whole season, they're just 7-8 overall this season with their big 3 are on the court. And then the ultimate embarrassment is Monday, giving up 142 to a Chicago Bulls team that was just absolutely pathetic offensively. So, I mentioned how the Bulls were 28th in efficiency in the month of February. They go into Philly and put 140 on it. I mean, I can't see how anybody could be confident in Philadelphia, never mind the rest of the season. Let's see what's going forward in the franchise. But, yeah, for this season, I think they've pretty much proven they're done for the year.
A quick drive-by comment on Paul George here, okay? The last time he played a game that his team won was January 25th. It's only a month.
Just a month for one of the better players on the team. Yeah. Meanwhile, he's still podcasting and has a lot of other thoughts going on around the basketball world. So figure that one out.
Yeah, I talk about how the defense has been terrible for all these teams, and with the exception of the Nets. Philadelphia this month, or for the season, excuse me, they're 20th in 2-point field goal percentage. They're 25th in 3-point field goal percentage. Well, there are no other shots around the field. That's it. So if you can't hit one of those, you're really not going to be much of a factor in any playoff chase.
Yeah, great point there. Bruce, you said you had a note on TV for us.
Oh, yeah. Well, I saw today, I'm always interested in what ESPN's doing with their coverage of the NBA. And
you're the one.
I don't have anything bad to say. I mean, I respect them. I mean, look, so many people just want to compare them to inside the NBA, and, they're never going to look good in that comparison. But interesting behind the scenes deal there. They've announced that Richard Jefferson is going to join Mike Breen and Doris Burke on their number 1 broadcasting team. I don't know that they've guaranteed him there for the finals, but to me, Amazon Prime is after RJ. They want him to be on their number 1 team. So I think ESPN's trying to, they want to keep him. I mean, he's good. They want to keep him around. So they're giving him that perk. And the other thing is kind of a tribute to somebody that a lot of fans who watch MSG Network will be familiar with the name Al Troutwig. Al has been one of the most versatile broadcasters in TV for, 4 decades. He passed away over the weekend from cancer. He was only 68 years old. He's done a little of everything. I mean, he was a great host, studio host. He was a play-by-play guy. He worked for ABC, did Olympics, this and that. So for those of us in the business, he was universally respected, and, Godspeed to the late Al Troutwig.
No doubt. And the last final thought I have for the both of you, too, is speaking of former players in the news, that is Kevin Garnett, who's rumored to possibly be joining the Minnesota Timberwolves' new front office once ownership takes course there. So wanted to get your final thoughts on how you think KG could do in a front office executive role. Bruce?
I thought you were going to let World B go first on that one.
Yeah. World B, go ahead. Let's hear what you got to say.
Well, I don't know anything about his ability to do the job in the front office. I'm not going to
I think it'll be great.
I really don't know, his role or anything like that. I will say this: I do appreciate the fact that he's returning to Minnesota to join that franchise. That's a big plus for the franchise because he is the ultimate. He's KG. He is the number one Timberwolves of all time there. So I give him credit for going back there. That should be interesting. I like the fact that he won the championship with Boston, but his roots are with Minnesota. So that was nice to see.
He is perhaps the fieriest competitor we've seen in the NBA over the past 3 decades, maybe. So I think having somebody of his stature in that organization, particularly as Worldby mentioned, he is the greatest Timberwolf of all time. Mm-hmm. And I can't even tell you who number 2 would be because it's so far and away he is the guy. I think it's good. I mean, look, one thing that you can virtually guarantee, I don't know what official position he's going to have, but it's highly likely that he will be the most foul-mouthed executive in the entire NBA.
Yeah, well, the one thing that goes along with the foul mouth is he's going to be brutally honest and have some intensity to him. So I think he'd be a great eye for talent, especially finding guys that want to play hard and compete like he did back in the day. And I think he's the type of executive that would definitely rip the players a new one, come from downstairs into the locker room post-game after a poor performance. And if you're not going to listen to KG in Minnesota, I don't know who you're listening to. So I think it could bode well for the Timberwolves moving forward. I think he can really connect with this generation of players. Obviously, they got to respect his resume. And I think there's a lot that he could offer that organization moving forward. So hopefully that comes to fruition. But with that will do it for this edition of the 48 Minutes podcast on Believe, presented by BetOnline. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with you next week to be sure you're up to date in 48 on all things around the association. Take care, everyone.